and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I want to go over my top 10 favorite books of all time with one honorable mention, because as I was grabbing these books, I saw another one that I realized I really wanted to put in this video, but I didn't want to kick any of the other books out, so it snuck its way in there. But let's jump right into my top 10 favorite books of all time. Number one on my list, and this is probably my number one favorite, is Aragon. The Aragon series is my absolute favorite. I love these books so much. I've reread these books so much that my poor copy of Aragon is falling apart at the seams. It has a huge break down the center. This poor book's been through so much, but I loved these books so much. I reread them all of the time, and in this series, my favorite book of the series is the final book, Inheritance. I love the rich storytelling in these books. I love the world building. I love the characters. And of course, I love the fantasy and the dragons. These books really kickstarted my love for fantasy and for dragons, and they are amazing. Best books I've ever read. There's not very many books that compare. Yes, I know this is going to be a video about my top 10 favorite books, but if we are rating them, these ones are 20 out of 10, and I love them. They are my favorite to reread over and over and over and over again. Number two comes with a little bit of a caveat. So number two in my top 10 favorite books of all time, the Harry Potter series. My caveat is this author is trash. She is a garbage human being, and I'm very upset that she was the one to write these books. I read these books and remember waiting and waiting for the last four in the series to come out. I love the characters. I love how they grow throughout the series, and I really do feel like I grew up alongside the characters because I was around the age of the characters in the books as I was reading the books. So yes, if you, by some reason, haven't read these yet, but you want to, please pick them up secondhand. They're so easy to find secondhand, or ask somebody if you can borrow them. They are good books. They're very good fantasy books. They really were instrumental in my love of magic and fantasy, and I do feel like I grew up with these characters, but the author is trash. Moving on from the author being trash, though, my favorite book in the series is the second one, Chamber of Secrets, and it's mainly for nostalgic. I can never say that word. It's mainly for sentimental reasons, because this was the first one I read in the series. A friend gifted it to me, and I blew through it and then immediately wanted to read the rest of the series, so picked up number one and number three, and then had to wait for all the rest of them to come out. But I've reread these many, many times. When I reread them recently, I reread them with a critical eye, paying attention to some of the red flags that are in the books about race and equality. But yeah, I very much love these books. I just wish it was a different author. Number three in the top 10 books of all time for me is the Wicked Lovely series. It's fae, it's fantasy. I love the characters, I love the story. It is my favorite. I love it. I love these books so much. And in the series, my favorite book of the series is Ink Exchange, which, funny enough, as I was grabbing books for this, I was reading this at some point and then put it back without finishing it, which is odd. If I'm going to reread these books. I usually reread Ink Exchange as a standalone because I think it could be a standalone book, even though it's technically the second in the series, but I love these books. They are very, very good fantasy books, and I reread them every couple of years. Third in my favorite books of all time, of course, Twilight. We all had a Twilight phase. It's objectively a bad series, but it started a huge love of vampire books for me. So after I read Twilight, I read House of Night, I read Vampire Academy, so many. I have like a huge stack of vampire books because of Twilight. When I reread Twilight, I do reread the series as a whole, so I don't really have a favorite book in the series anymore, but I do reread these fairly often. Obviously, I was reading it at some point when it got put away as well, but yeah, objectively a bad series and not great writing, but it's kind of a comfort book to me, so that's why it's up here on my list of favorite books. Number 5 is the Hunger Games series. It is young adult dystopian. I love young adult dystopian, and my love for young adult dystopian started with the Hunger Games. I read this when it came out, and then read the other ones as they were coming out as well. It's top of the list for me for dystopian novels. It always makes me cry, and I reread it a lot. In the Hunger Games series, my favorite book is Mockingjay. This is the one that makes me cry every time I read it, but I love how this is written, and I love the characters in it. Number 6 in my top 10 favorite books of all time is Ender's Game, a very good sci-fi book that really makes you think. I've reread this quite a few times now, and every time I reread it, I gain something new from it. Something else stands out to me as I read this book. The first time I read it, I blew through it. I didn't really pick up a whole lot of the deeper themes of the book. And then when I reread it recently, I picked up a whole lot more in this book. And it's very good. I'm actually trying to complete the series. When I first read this, and when I read it the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, I was borrowing it from my high school library, so I recently, in 2021, purchased the box set for this, and I still have to read the last 3 books in this series, but this one's my favorite by far. Number 7 in my top 10 favorite books of all time is the Night Angel trilogy, starting with The Way of the Shadows, secret, magical assassins with strong female characters. Yes, please give me more of this. I love the main character, I love how complex all the characters are, and I love the storytelling in this book. I also love how, especially later on in the series, it flips between different characters' viewpoints, but it does it in a very concise way where I'm not getting confused at what viewpoint I'm reading from, and it's very easy to follow when it does switch viewpoints, which is very nice for me. My favorite in the series is the last one, Beyond the Shadows. I just really loved how this series ended. Yet again, another book that at some point I was rereading it and then I put it back before finishing it. But I reread these books usually once every 2 years-ish, maybe once a year sometimes. I reread these in 2021, and I will probably reread them next year because I am a huge fan. Number 8 in this list is The Devourers. Now, something different about this one than all of the other books I've mentioned, I have only read this once. I am planning on rereading it this year because I remember really loving the amazing storytelling It's got some fantasy elements, and it does a very good job of flipping between present time and past within the story. And I loved it when I read it a couple of years ago. So I'm going to be rereading it to make sure that it, does stand up to what I remember. But when I was thinking about books for this video, this one was one of the first ones I thought of, so I knew it belonged on this list, even if I haven't read it as much as all the other books on the list. Still a very good book, and a beautiful cover, which I know we're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but a beautiful cover does definitely help that aesthetic urge to have your books look good. Number 9 in the top 10 books of all time for me. I don't know if anybody's going to be surprised by this, but of course it's the ACOTAR series. This very much reminds me of a grown-up Wicked Lovely, so when I read this for the first time, it felt like reading one of my favorite books again for the first time. So I loved that feeling. I love this series. I've already read it twice within a year, so definitely earned its place on my top 10 books of all time. And within this series, my favorite book is the second one, A Court of Mist and Fury. So good. I love the characters, I love the storytelling, and the smut is pretty great too. Definitely an adult book, but it's everything I love all in one book. The only thing it's really missing is dragons, but it's really good. I love the Fae, I love like I said, I love everything about this book. It's earned its spot. And number 10 for my top 10 books of all time is a recent read, which usually when I read a book for the first time, it doesn't gain a spot on my favorites list right away. It's usually after that second or third read through that it gains a spot. There's a couple exceptions in here. This is a big exception to the rule, which is The Priory of the Orange Tree. It is a massive book, but the world building, the characters, the fantasy, the dragons, the story, everything about this book is my favorite. 10 out of 10 for me. This book was so good. I could not put it down. And I'm going to reread this book. Even though it's such a huge book, I will reread this multiple times. I loved it that much. It also has strong female characters, which I'm always a sucker for having strong female characters in a book, especially if I relate to them. And then for our honorable mention, like I said, as I was grabbing the rest of the books for this video, I saw this one and I knew I couldn't leave it out, even though it is technically book number 11, and there's so many other books that I have that could have been on this list, but I couldn't leave this one out, and I couldn't knock out one of these other books to put it in their place. But that is Trickster's Choice. Very good fantasy. It has historical elements to the fantasy, like medieval times, I suppose you could say. There's magic in it. There's strong female characters. I very much loved this book. This is actually a new copy of it, so I can't show you how beat up my previous copy was. I think I let somebody else borrow book 1 and 2 of this. It's a duology, so I believe I let somebody borrow the books, and I don't believe I got them back, which is okay. I mean, I don't care, because obviously I could just repurchase them. So I've repurchased them, reread them recently, and I love all of the elements of this book. It is very good. I do recommend this book a lot. I am eventually going to read the other books by Tamora Pierce. I just haven't yet. I haven't purchased them yet, but I love the way she writes. And this book is so good. like I said, like it's one of my favorites. I can never put it down when I'm reading it, and I have reread this book many times. Many, many, many times. And I love it every time. So there we go. My top 10 favorite books of all time, plus one honorable mention. I hope you enjoyed hearing about all those books. I feel like I could go on and on and on about each of these books, but I think I've talked enough and rambled enough for this video. So let me know in the comments, what is your top favorite book of any genre? Whatever genre it is, what is your top favorite book? If you can pick one, I know it's very hard to pick one favorite book. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to stick around. I do a lot of vlogging, but I also do sit-down videos like this where I talk about something I'm passionate about, whether that is reading or whether that is motherhood or any other thing that's on my mind. I mean, I talk about a lot here, so subscribe if you want to stick around and see what's next. If you have specific videos you want to see from me, let me know in the comments because I'm open to ideas. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye. Honestly, this would be the more accurate thumbnail. Why do my books try and murder me? I'm just trying to hold all of them at once. I never learn.